Riall, in your chapter in Why the World Needs Anthropologists,
Yep.
you state that we need more anthropological thinking and not necessarily more anthropologists.
Right.
Could you elaborate on this statement?
Well, it was a sort of a facetious remark in order to focus people on what I think really matters. I'm not really saying we don't need more anthropologists, although I have to say that you and I both know that the academy in the United States has overproduced PhDs for years without without giving them much thought about how to employ them later. And I find this deeply unethical. I find it very morally suspect. Having said that, I've also maintained for many years that there are plenty of opportunities for anthropologists to work outside the academy and have very productive, indeed, stellar careers if they want them. The problem has always been the disconnect between the training that they get and the realities of the job market. So what I also have concluded from all of my work as a practitioner is that it is not really necessary to put an anthropologist into every single, committee room and boardroom and so forth. What you need to do instead is show people how to think more like an anthropologist for two reasons. One is it's not that difficult to teach people how to look at things the way we look at them. It's kind of like language teaching. I mean, you are at least bilingual. God knows what other languages you know. I'm sure there are many. And so am I. And when you go into language training discussions with academics, they kind of say, oh, well, it's very difficult. You have to major in French and so forth. Most people don't do this. They get a job in France and they learn to speak French in 3 months, and they do it by hanging out, right? The way anthropologists do it. So what I'm trying to say is it's not that difficult to learn to think like an anthropologist. Obviously, our academic colleagues can mystify it all they want. They can make it more complicated if they want to, fine. But in order to do the work of the world, the day-to-day jobs that people rely on, and I'm not talking about trivial jobs, I'm talking about really important ones like policy making. You don't need a PhD in anthropology, but you do need to think like one. And so it's not only easy to teach people to do this under the right circumstances, it's also very effective because it produces an almost immediate change in their competency. I find this with engineers all the time. Engineers are highly trained, very complicated stuff. And once you show them that, they go, oh, yeah, right, of course. So you're not teaching them to be anthropologists. You're teaching them how to be better engineers by thinking a different way. My friend Carrie Fosher says that what anthropology does for people is it makes things three-dimensional.
Oh, I love that.
And that's I think, is a good way to look at it.
Absolutely.
So that's what I meant when I said we don't need more anthropologists, we need more anthropological thinking.
Thank you. I think this question is related. How would you explain solving for pattern, which is another concept that you discuss in your chapter, to a person who is not an anthropologist? And could you give us an example?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of examples out there. I could use the one that I mentioned in the article, but let me explain that the solving for pattern, of course, is not my idea. This is Wendell Berry's phrase that he uses, but it's intuitively obvious to people. Yeah, you want things that work in the situation that they're designed for. And so, designers, I think, know this, but lots of policymakers don't necessarily know it. If you read the policy literature, you'll see, for example, that one of the things, and this was certainly true of my colleagues at USAID and the World Bank in the development business, they value efficiency, and what that often comes down to is, let's make this project look as much as possible like another project that we know how to do. And so let's take a solution from Peru, right? And take it to Nigeria, right? And plug it in. And they will use that language. They'll plug it in. And it should work, kind of the way an electrical appliance ought to work, except that it usually doesn't. So solving for pattern basically means figuring out how to tweak this thing, how to operationalize an idea or a concept or a solution or a strategy, whatever aspect of problem solving you're into. How do you make that work in that environment, in that particular environment? So when I teach my engineers at Purdue, my engineering students, when I used to teach them, I would say things like, you have been trained to build a bridge across the Wabash River, right, in West Lafayette. You can do that. You know how to do that. They're very proud of the fact that they know how to do that. But I said, could you build the same bridge in the Central African Republic? And they start by saying, oh yeah, sure, a bridge is a bridge. You know, steel is steel, concrete is concrete. And I said, yeah, but what else is there about that environment that you might need to understand? What about the climate? What about the river across which the bridge goes? What about the people that are going to not only use the bridge, but help you build the bridge? What about the kind of things that are going to go across the bridge? You know, where are you going to get your steel from? Where are you going to get your concrete from? How is that going to work for you? And they stop and they go, oh, yeah. And then they start thinking about those things. And being good engineers, they think of it as a problem to be solved, which of course it is. And they sort of turn to you and say, so how would we find those things out? And now you are having a conversation about thinking like an anthropologist. I can remember working with a group of young engineers who were doing a coffee project in Kenya one time. And it was a joint class, anthropologists and engineers in the same class. And the coffee project was going ahead. And these guys had come up with a very complicated but very effective irrigation system for the coffee plants, right? They had calculated the slopes using Google Earth. They'd figured out the gradients and the dimensions of the fields and so forth. And they had it all worked out to get water to the plants. And when they finished their presentation, the very first question came from this young woman who's an anthropologist. She raised her hand. She said, where's the water come from? And it stopped them cold. And they went, I'm sure there's a river close by. So she goes, okay, who owns the river? Who uses the river? Well, I don't know. I said, well, wouldn't that be important to understand? And whose land does the pipe go across to get the water from the river to the coffee plants? And how do people think about water anyway? Is it like a common good, or does it belong to somebody? And on and on. And they began to think about things this way. And they said, oh, yeah. So nobody was saying, don't do a coffee project. Everybody was saying, if you want this thing to work, make it work in that context. And I gave that example in the short chapter that I wrote about working with Senegalese villagers to grow tomatoes. And these guys from CH2M Hill in Seattle, who were great irrigation engineers, had worked out this elaborate, system of irrigation, which was going to work. It was fine, except that the watering time coincided with twilight, which is when the witches come out. And none of these people are going to go into the field and do this. And at first, the engineers kind of went, well, that's just superstition. I said, no. I said, you don't live here. You live in Seattle. Maybe you don't have witches in Seattle, but here, this is different. And I said, if you doubt me, let's go and look. And so we perched on the top of a hill. And, as night came down, all the villagers went inside their houses. And when night had fully fallen and it was totally dark, they came back out. Because it's only the twilight time. It's the crack between the two worlds. That's what allows the spirits to get out. So they were kind of, they said, yeah, okay, got it, because engineers are empirical. They look at data. This was data to them. So part of your job as an anthropologist, if you want to solve pattern, is you don't talk in generalities about cultural norms and values, blah, blah, blah. You show them, how this works in practice. because that's data for them. And that's something that I think almost every practitioner has figured out, is that you have to learn to translate what you know about social life into morphemes, if you like, into meanings that are significant for the people you're talking to.
Thank you. I love that story, by the way. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And one last question is a very general question. What would you recommend anthropologists who are starting their careers?
Well, my position on all of this has sort of, in some ways, hardened over the years. I always wanted to be a development person. I never really wanted to be an academic. Over the years, I gained a large measure of respect for academia, and I, in fact, joined the university. Although most of my career in the university has been as a university administrator, not as an academic. And so I would say to people, I am a practitioner, kind of the way Dennis Wiedemann is a practitioner. He works at a university. He and I used to do a lot of the same sorts of things. So although I have a lot of respect for the academy, I am not impressed with the way our discipline has approached the changing situation around us. The world is crying out for the kinds of stuff that anthropologists can help them do. We are not going to save the world. It's not up to us alone. It's us in relationship to others. And those others include policymakers and people from different disciplines and people who disagree with us, as well as ordinary ground level people who just are living their lives. So we need to figure out how to work with each other. I don't think the academy teaches people to do that very well. I think the academy privileges individual effort. If you think about it, I mean, almost all professional anthropologists in the academy are basically rational choice theorists in that sense. They believe in individuals making decisions, and they're very resistant to the idea that they should somehow take direction from anybody because they see themselves as independent intellects. Well, yes, they are kind of, but they're not. They're not as independent as they think they are. Most of them are being paid through public funds, for example. And so, when my faculty members would say to me, well, I'm a free agent, I'd say, no, you're not. You're an employee of the state of Indiana. I mean, come on, that's what you are. You're like somebody working at the DMV. Do your damn job. So I'm not impressed with the way the discipline has handled this. I don't think they quite understand what it means to be engaged. If you remember that seminal article that came out in Current Anthropology back, Seth Lowe and a few other people wrote this thing about engagement in anthropology. Implementation was never measured, was never mentioned. It's not on their radar to actually do things. And the doing of things is how you learn how things get done. And that, as I tried to say in the article, is where the source material comes for theory building. It comes from getting out into the field and actually doing things. Back in the 1930s and 40s, when people like Evans Pritchard and the rest of them were running around, it wasn't that. It was social data that came back. Now it's much more than that. It's not just social data. It's also hard-won experience about this is how that works. This is what will work. This is what won't work. This is all back to your question about solving for pattern. You have to know that. And so practitioners are learning that every single day. They go in and they do that kind of work, and they're learning a lot about how it works. They're mostly talking to each other. They are not talking, by and large, to the academy. Or if they try, the academy isn't much interested. They're interested in theories. They're interested in issues of social justice and blah, 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 blah. And all of this is good stuff. But it's not, it's what Donald Schoen called working up on the dry knoll, not down in the swamp. And the swamp is where stuff happens. That's where things really matter. And the dry knoll is a great place to sort of dry off and think, but it's not getting much done up there. It's down in the swamp. So, if you're asking for advice for a younger anthropologist, what I would say is this: take a very, sorry, my wife just came in and winked at me. And
say hello to her.
Yeah, Carla says hello.
Okay.
So I would say to a younger anthropologist, take a good long look at the academy and ask yourself, is this the kind of career that you want? And if it is, great, go for it. If it isn't, then think about what else you'd like to do. And choosing the other path is not going to be very easy. I mean, it's not easy to get an academic job. I get that. But the way you do it is dead simple. You go to the most prestigious university you can get into. You find the most prestigious advisor in the place. And you ask him or her, what should I do, sir or madam? And you do everything they tell you to do. And then they will write you reference letters, and then you'll get a job. That's how that works. I mean, I'm very blunt about that. If you go to a third tier university in the United States with an anthropology, you're not going to get an academic job. It's done. I mean, we have a rigid caste system here. So if that's what you want, then your path is very clear. If you want to become a practitioner, then what you have to do is go to a school which will actually teach you how to do that. And there aren't that many around, but there are some. And more are coming online, but you need to probably do a lot of self-education as well, and a lot of networking, and a lot of thinking. And then you can be successful, and you can be very successful as a practitioner. So that's what I'd advise people. It's interesting. It's one of the most useful disciplines in the world. I think I've never regretted the decision to be an anthropologist. I think that it's just so illuminating. I think I said in there, if intelligence is the ability to make finer and finer discriminations, anthropology makes us all smarter. And it certainly has worked that way for me. I was pretty stupid when I graduated from college. No, I really was. I was a sort of a fat boy. I mean, I was an okay guy. I wasn't a bad guy. But boy, did it open my eyes. It just did. And it has continued to do that. It's the discipline that just keeps on giving. There's nothing that you see or do, even at my age, that isn't sort of illuminated through this prism of my discipline. I find it so useful in so many ways. So I just think that teaching people to think a little bit more that way is one of the most important contributions that we can make. Getting it into our primary and secondary schools, getting it out onto the street, and so forth is just I think it's a really major challenge for our discipline. And I don't see us doing much of that. I really don't. I think we're internally, we're talking a lot to each other. So I like the project that you and Dan and some other folks are doing. I think it's great, and anything I can do to help you with that, you let me know, because there's a bunch of us that get it, and we just need to keep going.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much, Riall. This was wonderful.